Welcome to the second episode in a Legendarium series about stories of the ancient world. In this episode, we will be talking about the relationships between the classical world and Africa. First, we will talk about Greek trade with Africa, how Egypt helped to finance Rome after becoming an imperial province, and how Egypt opened the door to a lucrative Roman trade in African goods like turtle shells and ivory. Contact between classical Europe and Africa dated back to the Bronze Age, when merchant ships from Minoan Greece made contact with the Kingdom of Egypt. During the Bronze Age, metal trade was vital to sustaining society, as copper and tin were needed in great quantities to make bronze. However, Egyptian-style pottery, ostrich eggs, and papyrus also made their way to Minoan palaces, pointing to vast trade networks between Greece, the Levant, and northern Africa. The royal courts of Egypt and Mycenae seem to have exchanged royal gifts, and the Mycenaean Greeks provided the Egyptians with the metals they needed for the bronze and glass trade. Trade expanded through the Classical Age, with many of the wealthier city-states importing grain, slaves, and luxury goods from Egypt, which itself had trade contacts further south in Africa. Though the Greeks had extensive contact with Egypt, contact with the rest of Africa, a region the Greeks called Ethiopia, remained minimal. As is often the case, the Greeks populated this vast blank space on the map with all manner of fantastic creatures. Herodotus, the father of history, claimed that Ethiopia was inhabited by giant leathery horses with skins so hard it could be made into spear shafts. Herodotus also claimed that Ethiopians passed the time by hunting mole-dwelling men who shrieked like bats and ate snakes and lizards for breakfast. The Ethiopians are claimed to have carried out these hunts in 4-horse chariots. Whether because they didn't believe such fantastic stories, or simply because they needed the money more, the Romans became much more involved in the Africa trade. During the later Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, the canals and waterways of the country fell into disrepair, in part to free up money for the lavish lifestyles of the royal court. By the time Augustus made Egypt into an imperial province, the ancient and supposedly wealthy Kingdom of Egypt only provided Rome with about 40 million sesterces per year in taxes, the same as the less developed Gallic provinces. Augustus reformed administration by placing Egypt under his direct control and rebuilding the Red Sea ports, which allowed merchant ships to travel to India. Over 100 ships a year made the journey from Rome to ancient India, with the India trade providing 300 million sesterces in customs duties within a few years, and that grew to 600 million by the end of Augustus's reign. This amounts to 2/3 of the tax income of the Roman Empire. However, Egypt was only the beginning of Rome's contacts with Africa. The Ptolemaic kings in Egypt established stations for royal elephants hunts far to the south, the most important being Ptolemais Theron, which Roman military officers turned into a farming settlement and eventually a way station for Roman trade ships heading down the East African coast. Their first major stopping point was the Kingdom of Aksum, located in modern-day Ethiopia. Aksum's major port, Adulis, was a gathering point for Africans bringing ivory, rhino horn, hippo hide, tortoise shells, and slaves to sell to the Romans. Roman merchants set up a permanent home on a nearby island called Orient to protect themselves and their goods from possible attack. The most prized export good from Aksum was turtle and tortoise shells, an exotic material that Roman craftsmen used to decorate curule seats, the lavish and ornate chairs used by higher-ranking magistrates when they did state business. However, wealthy Romans also began to inlay their doorposts and ornamental furniture with tortoise-shell veneers as well. The other great product to come out of Aksum was ivory. The capital city of the African kingdom, also called Aksum, was in the middle of a central highland home to many herds of grazing elephants and hippos. Royal hunters killed these animals for their ivory and then took them to the port of Adulis, where they were exchanged for heavy Roman cloaks and Indian iron. Indian iron was used by the Axumites to make spears strong enough to bring down elephants and thus keep the ivory trade going. Aristocratic estates back in Rome used ivory to adorn their ceilings, table legs, and dinner couches. Ivory flutes and pipes were played in Roman temples during animal sacrifices. Ivory was also used to decorate the sword hilts of wealthier legionaries, like centurions and tribunes. However, the Romans headed further south into modern-day Somalia to cut aromatic trees for timber and trade olives and clothes with local chiefs for cinnamon, slaves, and high-quality myrrh. Roman merchants went as far south as Rapta in modern-day Tanzania. To our knowledge, Rapta was the furthest south that the Romans sailed and may have represented the end of the known world to them. And that wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you saw, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.